first game against world champion. Not one-on-one. It was a simultaneous exhibition, though, as you could see, it ended in one-on-one, and it was, I guess, quite symbolic. But before we enter the moves of the game that was played in Leningrad in November 1975, I should say a few words about the format of the competition. It was called in the Soviet Union Grandmasters versus Pioneers, though it was not just versus Pioneers because it was a mixture. Each team had a captain, a grandmaster, and 7 players, 6 boys and 1 girl, and facing another team, so there was a kind of cross competition. Our grandmaster played against their pioneers, their team, and the grandmaster from the opposite team was taking on us. And I played for Baku team, for the team of Pioneer Palace of Baku, and we qualified twice from the semi-final groups in 1974 and in 1975, and made it to the final. So 1974 was my first appearance on this big stage, and I described in my book the feelings of shaking hands was Tal. That's the first game we played against Riga, and I could shake Tal's hand, and I was almost paralyzed by this fact. So because it's like entering the world of legends, and I guess that's this handshake made me very shaky during the game, and I lost it very poorly. Then I played Polugayevsky there, and it's also lost. And ended up nicely because I had one victory and beating Yuri Averbach, which was good for a 10-year-old. But and I played board 2. But in 1975, I played already board 1. I was the youngest in the team, but was someone who should be reckoned with. And in this tournament, though I made only 2.5 out of 6, with 1 win and 2 losses, including this one, that we'll look at it now. But after the tournament, while being asked about the most interesting and most promising young players, my name appeared on every list. Karpov mentioned me, and a couple of others. Korchnoi mentioned just me because he had a very difficult time. That was also my first game was Korchnoi, surviving, so he escaped by miracle. And Polugayevsky also survived by miracle against me, so put my name on the list. The reason they recognized that I did well, though some players made more points, because I played for a relatively weak team. Well, it's a relatively weak team. Baku was a good team, but no match to Moscow or Leningrad. And that's why being in a weaker team puts you in a very disadvantageous position, as it happened in this match. So most of my teammates, actually all but one, lost very quickly. And you imagine if Grandmaster was able to cut the number of boards, he can start concentrating on a key game. And that was the key game of the match. But again, it probably was a message from the future that there will be so many more pictures of Anatoly Karpov facing Garry Kasparov. Though at the time I was a candidate master from Baku, a young, promising player, many said great talent, and Anatoly Karpov, a fresh world champion who was crowned in April 1975. So Karpov played e4, and I remember preparing for the game with Alexander Nikitsin, who was already engaged in working with me, and he suggested that instead of playing Scheveningen, that classical Scheveningen, I would go for Najdorf. I was a bit nervous because I never played it before, and I thought, what if Karpov plays bishop g5? But he had a few ideas, so what should I do? And when I say ideas, it's not preparation, lines. It's just, Garry, you do this. You play the Pologaevsky line, so the Pologaevsky variation after bishop g5. And we looked for, I don't know, probably 15 minutes to some latest games, and I said, fine, I will go for that. But Karpov played bishop e2. That's his favorite move. And that's what he would do against me in our World Championship games. He also had this move played against Pologaevsky in their quarterfinal match in 1974, and had some really good victories. Though the positions in the middle game, they were not so clear, and instead of playing e6, which I would do in all our matches, in all our games, so I played e5. That's like a Najdorf line, while e6 brings you to the Scheveningen. E5, knight b3, bishop e7. He played castle, but against Pologaevsky, but he played bishop g5. The idea is that after bishop e6 to force black to take on f4 now, because f5 becomes very unpleasant threat. So I took on f4, bishop takes f4, knight c6, castle and castle. For me, the position was quite new, so I didn't know exactly what to do, but I had enough knowledge about Sicilian, so I thought that I had to create some kind of counterplay. Though I have to say that this game, deviated from traditional middle game patterns and became quite unusual. And I could remember Karpov was quite uncomfortable because he could immediately see that the game was not going in the direction he wanted. So he played king h1, and I played b5 here. This d5 was another option, but I wasn't sure whether whether d5, e5, knight e4, or knight d7. Those are just the quite playable moves that would be something that equalizing. And I played more traditionally. So Karpov stopped d5 now, and also just thought the bishop is well located there. But I found, I think it's quite a good maneuver now. Bishop c4, rook f2, and now b4. So knight d5, we exchanged on d5, and bishop f6. So at first glance, white had significant advantage. It's an illusion because knight can go on c6, but this square just it doesn't offer much because black had a very solid position in the center. The pawn on d5 potentially weak, and black can easily develop the pieces. So it's the knight on c6 again. It's not going to be a decisive factor because the black had no real weaknesses, and they can simply go around this knight. So rook d2. Play queen b6, bishop e3, queen c7. So far, it's all going fine for black. So attacking a bishop doesn't make much sense because my bishop goes on b5. So black has very good position here and actually take control of this square. Karpov tried to at least to just bring the bishop away from this knight. But the black game goes very nicely, so I just don't have any real problems. a3, a5, take Karpov, exchange these pieces, played b3, and I played bishop a6. Yeah, and now knight c6. So I avoided, explaining all the lines. Actually, there were a few moments where Black could play better, but I didn't want to mention that because it could, take too much time. The game was of pretty high quality, and for those who would like to learn more, so there's always a PGN file, so where you can find all the lines and variations, and if you want to hear the whole story behind the game, so you can look for my explanations in Kasparov and Kasparov. So that's the book that covered my most important games. Or there's a special series, Kasparov versus Karpov, where every game that we play with Karpov has been covered. So Kasparov and Karpov, or Kasparov and Kasparov. So that's as you will have full story if you want to enlarge your knowledge of our games. So I now took on c6 because the pawn was hanging, but also I saw an opportunity to create counterplay on e-file. And actually that's the whole plan was a mistake, because Karpov could have taken on d6 the pawn, and that would put me in great danger. I missed it completely, but Karpov also missed it. He played bishop d5. That's a mistake that typically made in the simul, and then my bishop went on c3, and after rook f2, had I played rook e7, a very quiet move, defending the pawn. And I remember, so when I showed the game to Mark Taimanov, when I visited him in his apartment in Leningrad, so he said rook e7, queen f3, king g7, and then after g4 I can play f6, and then my rook can go there. So it's an odd situation where just, the bishops, they cut the board, but my bishops are just doing actually a better job. And while this pawn is dangerous, but it goes nowhere, and then eventually Black could start, activating the rook, creating significant problems for white. So it's could be a much better game for Black, and it's easy to play. So it's always a pity when you have a move that you missed, and this move could be a game changer, because it could put white, as I said, in significant disadvantage. But I just tried to get things done, so that I couldn't control my emotions, and then still rook e7 would be okay. It still would offer me a better game, because white cannot really improve the position. But bishop d4, that's allowed Karpov to refute it with a fairly simple tactics, and I didn't find this as the best defense here. So I still had a little chance if I took here and took on c6, but it's still lost. So it's not white will still be winning this game. So it's creating the decisive threats. So with queen and bishop, but that would be the best chance, because at least here he had to work. He had to actually come up with some just maneuvers, or check and then check and then check, and then just it's winning, but in the simul anything can happen, and I'm missing that. I lost very quickly the queen's ending, because this pawn became a decisive factor. So since I made no effort to eliminate it, so now Karpov had no reason to take with a queen here. He can take with a king, and the game was over. So I lost the game, and needless to say, I was unhappy, but I played against world champion, literally one-on-one at the end of the match, and that was a good sign. Our next game, a real one, take place in 1981, more than 5 years after match in our first game in Leningrad. Probably worth adding that after this game, and after the tournament in Leningrad, I came back to Baku and just did my training, my preparation, and 2 months later, I became the youngest champion of USSR under 18, being just 12. So you may say that this game gave me a nice push, and I would say added to my confidence. Yes, I can easily see mistakes I made, but I was just 12 and I played world champion.